Billy Smith remembered the cake. It was white, 3 layers, with blue sugar roses along the bottom edge. Someone on the Graceland staff had ordered it. Someone else had arranged for it to be carried into the room at the right moment. It was the kind of birthday gesture that happens when the people around you have gotten used to organizing your life. When the details of celebration have become logistics, managed by others, arriving on schedule. Elvis looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Billy. And Billy, who had known Elvis since they were both children growing up in Tupelo, who had slept in the same beds and eaten at the same tables and been through everything the years had brought. Billy understood in that moment that something was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a bad mood or a difficult week. Wrong in a deeper way. The kind of wrong that had been accumulating quietly for a long time and had chosen that particular January night to become visible. Elvis was 42 years old, and he did not look it. He looked older, and he did not look like a man celebrating. January 8, 1977, Graceland, Memphis. It was the last birthday Elvis Presley would ever have, though nobody in that room knew it yet. 7 months and 8 days later, he would be gone. But on that January night, in the house he had bought for his parents and filled with the people he loved, and Elvis sat in front of a birthday cake and wore an expression that Billy Smith would carry with him for the rest of his life and struggle for 40 years to find words for. Elvis had been unwell in ways that those close to him had been watching with growing fear throughout 1976 and into 1977. The performances had become harder. The weight had fluctuated in ways that his costumes, let out and taken in repeatedly, bore silent witness to. On the medications, the prescriptions that had multiplied year by year, managed by doctors whose relationship with Elvis had long since crossed the line between medicine and accommodation, had become a kind of architecture around his daily life, a structure that held him up and, at the same time, kept him from seeing clearly how much he had come to depend on it. Billy had watched all of it. He had watched because he was there, not as an employee, not as a manager, or not as someone whose income depended on Elvis remaining functional. Billy was family, the kind of family that goes back before the money and the fame and the machinery that surrounded both. They had grown up together in the 2-room house in Tupelo before there was anything to want. They had moved to Memphis together. They had been present for each other through the ordinary accumulation of a shared life. And on the night of Elvis's last birthday, Billy was present for something else. After the cake, after the handful of people who had gathered had sung and eaten and drifted away. After Graceland had gone quiet in the way it went quiet late at night, the staff retreated, the rooms dimming one by one, Elvis found Billy and asked him to stay. They sat together in the small den off the main room, the one with the low lighting that Elvis preferred in the evenings. Billy had a cup of coffee. Elvis had nothing. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and looked at the floor for a while before he said anything. "I don't know who I am anymore when nobody's watching," Elvis said. Billy didn't answer right away. He had learned, in decades of knowing Elvis, that some things didn't need an immediate response. Some things needed to be said and heard and held for a moment before anyone reached for words. "I don't mean that the way it sounds," Elvis continued. "I know who I am. I just don't know if I like him. Before we go further, if this is the kind of story you come here for, the ones that happened in the rooms nobody photographed, consider subscribing to Last Bow Stories. Every video is built on moments like this one, quiet, real, the kind that only makes sense when you let them breathe. One question while you're here: has someone close to you ever said something honest in a quiet moment that you've never been able to forget? Leave it in the comments. Now, back to Elvis, because what Billy heard that night, and what Elvis asked of him before the conversation ended, is something Billy carried alone for a very long time. Elvis talked for a while that January night, not dramatically, not in the way of someone making a statement, in the way of a person who has been alone with something for too long and has finally found a room quiet enough to say it out loud. And he talked about the shows, not with pride, but with something closer to bewilderment at his own ability to keep doing them. He talked about the distance he felt from his own life, about the way Graceland, which he had bought to give his family a home, had become something else, a place where people orbited him rather than lived with him. "I miss being ordinary," Elvis said. "I've been trying to remember what that felt like, and I can't." He paused. I think I forgot it too fast. Billy sat with him until after 2 in the morning. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't offer reassurances. He understood, with the instinct of someone who had loved Elvis since before Elvis was Elvis, that what was being asked of him was not solutions. It was simply presence. The specific gift of someone who knows you well enough to stay in the room without making the room about themselves. Before Billy left that night, Elvis stopped him at the door. He put his hand on Billy's arm. Not a gesture of sentiment, not performance, just the plain weight of one person making contact with another, and he said, "Don't tell anybody what I said tonight, not because it matters, just because it's mine." Billy kept that promise. He kept it through the months that followed. Through August 16th, 1977, and the call that came that afternoon, and everything that came after. And through the decades of interviews and documentaries and books and speculation. Through every moment when someone asked him what Elvis had really been like in those last months, and he answered in the careful, partial way of a man who is honoring something without being willing to betray it. He kept it for 40 years, not because Elvis had asked him to, but because some conversations belonged to the people who had them, and Billy understood that the most faithful thing he could do with what Elvis had given him that January night was to hold it the same way Elvis had held so much, quietly, without making it anyone else's burden. There are things fame cannot give a person. Not comfort in the dark hours, not the relief of being known without being performed for. Would not the specific peace of sitting in a room with someone who loved you before you were worth anything to the world, and loving them back in the same uncomplicated way. Elvis had Billy Smith for that. And on the last birthday he ever had, when the cake had been cleared and the room had gone quiet, Elvis used that gift the way all of us use the rarest things we have, carefully, honestly, and only when there was no one else around. If this story stayed with you, to subscribe to Last Bow Stories, share it with someone who has been that presence for another person, the one who stays in the room without making it about themselves. And in the comments, tell us, who has been that person for you? Some people are remembered for what they gave the world. Elvis also gave things that the world never got to see.